Hey, welcome everyone. Good afternoon. This is Indigenous Ways of Knowing and School Community Garden Projects. This is brought to you by ARPDC, or the Alberta Regional Professional Development Consortia. I'm part of ERLC, one of the 7 groups that make that consortia, as well as we're funded through Learn Alberta. Do the land acknowledgement first before I get going. So I live on Treaty 7 land, which is here in Calgary, the ancestral home of the Blackfoot people. There are Dene people here at Sutina, as well as Métis Nation Region 5, which I belong to. There's also Region 6. All have contributed to the shaping of Alberta and Canada. I thank the Blackfoot people for sharing their land with me. And if you know which treaty land you're on, or if you're not, which land of people that have been displaced that originally were there, you can pop that into the chat if you'd like. I'm just looking to see who's on. I don't know if I recognize any names this time, but if you have been to my sessions, just bear with me as I have to go through this each time, just in case there's new people. My name is Tammy Johnson, and I am Red River Métis from just north of Winnipeg, Selkirk, Manitoba. Through ARPDC, we're called Designers of Professional Learning, which really means that besides these online presentations that we are predominantly doing now due to, like I said, it's always one good side effect of COVID was that a lot of resources are now available online that were not before, as well as the teacher PD through ARPDC is readily available. I also do face-to-face workshops. I was actually just in St. Albert yesterday. Came back last night. Tomorrow I'm in Pinoca, so we do face-to-face presentations as well as workshops and work on curriculum. My capacity this year for curriculum would be advising the larger core area groups on how to infuse First Nations, Métis, and Inuit content into their subject areas, because the focus, of course, this year is on the new curriculum for elementary that's been released. And so being Red River Métis means that I'm from what was historically known as the Red River Settlement, and that would be the name that was given to that area by Canada after Lower and Upper Canada took over the western area of what is now Canada. Before it was Canada, it was just called Manitoba by Louis Riel, the area that we had. And if you are Indigenous, or if you're not, I'll explain this to you, but 2 questions we always ask people is, what's your name, meaning who are your people? And then we ask you, where are you from, meaning where's your land? So I've already told you where I'm from. My main family surnames are Mowat, McDonald, Mackay, and Beaudry. My mom's a Mowat. That's her maiden name. And Mackays and Beaudrys are also from around Alberta, across the prairies actually, but Beaudry's particularly a French Métis family from Alberta. My family did spend time in northern Alberta. They lived at Fort Edmonton and Fort Saskatchewan. They had land there before coming back to Manitoba and staying there and settling there. You don't know, the Métis are known as wanderers and explore everything. That is a picture of my great-grandpa, James Mowat, that's sitting there and on the bench there by the rocks. And James Mowat Elementary is named after him in Fort Saskatchewan, as well as Mowat Park. And then in Edmonton, there's a street named after him. It's James Mowat Trail, but it's spelled with 2 T's. It doesn't matter because it was MOAD when they came to Canada, but the English at the Hudson Bay Company didn't understand their Orcadian accent. So if you don't know where that is, that's Orkney Islands, which is just kind of southwest of the Shetland Islands. They're almost all the way to Iceland. And those are actually Norwegian settlements originally in Scotland, and they speak an archaic version of Norwegian with a Scottish accent. So you can't actually blame them for not understanding them necessarily. So, and beside that is a picture of his surviving children. So the middle boy is my grandpa, Rosser Mowat. And then his 2 brothers, Oliver and Stanley, and my great aunt Tassie with her Sunday best on. I did start teaching in Winnipeg, where I went to school, and I started teaching in the same school division that I graduated from, Seven Oaks School Division, and basically started teaching in a school right on Main Street in Winnipeg, if anybody knows Winnipeg, part of the core area. They've changed some of the kind of names of the areas in Winnipeg since I've lived there, because it's been almost 30 years, but back in the day it was a little bit of a rough area. Anyways, a lot of the students that I worked with were Indigenous that had come right off of the reserve at that time. Late 80s economic issue, seemed kind of be much worse than it is even today. And so people were looking for jobs, and being the only Indigenous teacher in the school, they got me to come in and work with the kids, and that kind of started that work for me. I've worked a lot in special education as well, and the two do kind of go hand in hand because Indigenous students tend to have a lot of gaps. Not all of them, but if they've moved around, a lot of people have moved around. Parents often don't confront the schools about problems. I even know a family that moved from Calgary to Edmonton to be with their family because their daughter's being bullied, and the school administration just wouldn't listen to them here. So go to great lengths just to avoid having to deal with that kind of stuff sometimes. So there's a lot of transience and moving around even within this city. And yeah, and then a couple of years ago, I took a position with KTCA, or Kataskanau Tribal Council in Northern Alberta, along with Ignite e-learning online, to take their outreach program grades 7 to 9. And it was based on the seasons, so fall, winter, spring, as well as land-based learning. I decolonized it for them and indigenized it for their particular cultures. So there's 5 groups of Cree language speakers, Woodland Cree speakers, that are together in that group of nations. And then added Cree language to it, which I'm learning now myself. And so the elders took the work that I did and were very pleased with it. So I was really encouraged to go on with this work. My main goal is to help particularly non-Indigenous educators to understand how to do this work in a respectful way without appropriating, because I know that's always a concern for teachers. They don't want to do that. And, just to move along the work that can be done in terms of infusing Indigenous ways of knowing into the curriculum. Before we get going, I'm just going to show you the AIR PDC resources. So if you don't know about these are already created by Alberta teachers for Alberta teachers. So some really great resources here. If you don't know about Empowering the Spirit, you've probably seen stuff from Empowering the Spirit in your schools, or somebody's got a resource from there and didn't realize that that was where it's from. Sometimes you just search and find yourself on this site without knowing about the main page. But yeah, it's referenced all through Canada, particularly for education programs on post-secondary, as well as lots on library services across Canada. I've even seen it referenced in the US. My favorite spot, I always tell people, is under Orange Shirt Day and Beyond, which is the teaching tools. There's posters on there for leveled divisions as well, things like sharing circles or Orange Shirt Day and all that kind of stuff. So there's lots of stuff in there. I always suggest people start there before they go anywhere else to look for things, because there's lots of stuff already created. And then the other thing you can do on this site is that you can find resources by focus, and they've already got the search engine in here. It's a really good search engine, actually. Focus, and of course I'm down here, so First Nations, Métis, Inuit. It comes up with all the resources that are available. Things like Our Way is a Valid Way and Education is Our Buffalo, and those have been around for a while. I had physical copies of those in schools when I was younger and teaching in schools. So this is, you can search by audience as well, or level, or type. And like I said, they're all Alberta resources, and I also know that the French group is trying to get all of them available en français as well. They're not all quite there yet, but it's quite an undertaking to get all of that done, but I know that that's their goal. So that's what you're looking for as well. Anyways, we'll get into the heart of the presentations. I've got a lot of resources for you guys to show you. Lesson plans and things like that at the end, but also I want to show you, obviously here we're going to talk about Indigenous ways of knowing, land-based learning, and it's actually moving to culture-based learning. Can't really get into details at this point, but it's more because the funders don't necessarily understand that you can do some land-based learning activities that are inside, especially when it's really cold outside, like watching videos or, using things like I have my drum or rattle, something like that. All materials are from outside, and talk about it as well. But that's what we're moving to that. So that'll eventually change in language. We'll talk about Indigenous plants. So Indigenous to obviously Alberta, but also ones that Indigenous people have been using as medicines and that kind of stuff. We'll talk about examples of Indigenous school gardens, a few of them that I found here in Alberta. Some lesson plans for use and garden project grants that I found as well that you can apply for. Many of them need to be applied for early. That's one of the reasons I do this session earlier in the year, because a lot of them are due into January, February as well. And then some books and resources that I found for you as well. All right, so we'll just talk about this first. So, and this is actually from the Gabrielle Dumont Institute, which is a Métis Institute. Just throwing that in there too, because if people always think of land-based or culture-based learning as only First Nations or Inuit, but it is also part of Métis culture. So land-based pedagogy, right, is the progressive teacher that will provide us the tools to build healthy communities with sustainable futures, right? So the land is what we believe teaches us. The land informs us as Indigenous peoples. I spent a good part of my childhood outside. My grandparents had also land just north of Selkirk. We didn't have running water there, but we were by a creek, and we grew all our own food. I spent all my time outside as a kid and with animals and nature, and it's really important. I think we've lost a lot of that, unfortunately. I wish my kids could have grown up more like that too. But I think understanding the land, as it says here, right? How can we better teach empathy for the earth, that we need it, and then the animals around and that kind of thing, right? We need to instill responsibility and be examples of honorable human reciprocation. We talk about history or survival skills, all those things, right? I know when COVID started, I know everybody kind of panicked, and I would even including my children. And actually they said at one point, they're like, well, Mom, we'll just come to you because you know how to grow things. You know how, like, if you needed to hunt an animal, you could do it, right? If I need a rabbit to eat or whatever. It was funny, right? Because we're all talking, this is the apocalypse. We didn't know. I know how to sew. I know how to make all the things, build a fire, all those, that's a thing. And they said, well, we'll go to Mom if we need these things, right? It was kind of funny, but at the same time, I thought about it, and I thought, wow, so many people cannot survive. How would they survive without running water or having a store to go to all the time, right? It's kind of scary. So I mean, these things are really important, and we've lost a lot of this in culture, basically. So I'm gonna ask you guys first, if you want to just take a moment to if something pops into your head, into the chat. But what are the benefits of teaching children about Indigenous plants and gardening, do you think? So obviously you're here for that reason, you're interested. So I'm just wondering what you might think that is important about that. If you can think of anything. Give you a minute. Oh, awesome. Oh, Jessica, I think I recognize your name. They get to know and understand the land that they live on. Yes, that's really important. And then Alexander says, I don't remember Alex. I recognize your name too. It expands our way of thinking about plants in general. Yeah, it definitely, right? It's important. I think my big thing is, we all go to the store. We even, to buy plants, we go to the store, right? It's interesting. Instead of growing them ourselves or finding them outside, and we don't really know the things that are all around us. So, to be observant as well, right? To look beyond yourselves. Carolyn says it is all natural and can see it, but don't understand what the benefits can be. True. Yes, true. Yeah, because there's a lot of things that grow right around us that are actually medicinal, and can help us, right? So yeah, so we'll talk about some of those benefits, right? And you guys mentioned some of this as well, right? There's that environmental stewardship piece where, I learned to appreciate the land and care for it. There's definitely those First Nations, Métis, and Inuit connections that are there. Oh, I've got another one. Darcy says, yeah, teaching the history. Yeah, for sure, right? Exactly. So that's part of those FNMI connections too. You learn sustainability practices as well. There's those science connections you guys mentioned. I think it's really important too that First Nations, Métis, and Inuit students see themselves in school practices as well, so they can see some of these things being used and shown how important it is, and those connections to the land, as you guys were saying. And Jessica also added, you also get to see and understand how much scientific knowledge Indigenous people have through their plant knowledge. Exactly, yeah. It's interesting, right? Because I think that was one big thing that I really enlightened myself about when I was tasked with doing that project for KTCA in terms of the connections for math and science. I didn't think there'd be a huge problem making those connections, but I didn't realize when I started getting down to it how much of life for Indigenous peoples is all about math and science. I mean, and language arts as well, in terms of storytelling and that sort of thing. But just the amount of knowledge, it's just, there's no words for mathematics or science, because nobody was thinking I'm because we don't separate subjects, right? The things are not modulated into small pieces like Western knowledge. And so this is part of life and what you're learning. And I think that, yeah, it's really important for non-Indigenous kids and families to see this, but Indigenous kids to see this about themselves, to see, you know what? Indigenous people have always been really great scientists, right? Knowing how to do this. And many of the things that Indigenous people have been talking about for years, and especially with plants, a lot of that knowledge was stolen by pharmaceutical companies, especially in the United States. One thing I was surprised about to find out when I attended an online session through Telespark last year, about this time actually, about plant knowledge, was that in the US, they actually criminalized it for Indigenous peoples to use their plants, some of their plant medicines, because they had patented it as a pharmaceutical, which just blew my mind. I thought, wow, like seriously, they made it illegal for our people to actually use the properties to heal themselves because they wanted to make money off of it. It's not a surprise, but it just kind of shocked me that that was the case. But yeah, exactly. So I think you can see where you can make those connections and show how important this knowledge is, and how long it's been around, and it's still relevant. So it's really important. Of course, when we talk about indigenous or native plants, these are plants that are native to each area of Earth, right? And there are indigenous people across the Earth, and they have been using these plants for however long they have been around. In terms of Alberta, I mean, I don't know how much you guys know about plants. I assume if you're here, you're interested in it anyways, but we talk about plant hardiness by zone or can't speak municipality, sorry, a little tired. But I did find this Natural Resources Canada has this plant hardiness zone by municipality. And I just searched by C because I'm in Calgary. So I looked on here. And of course, I already knew this because I do garden, right? So, but I mean, it's interesting even to look at how it's changed over the years too, right? Like how the zone has changed in terms of how the earth and the weather and that kind of thing has changed too. But it gives you a chance to look up and even get the kids to look up and see what is their zone of hardiness, and in terms of, why do certain plants grow in certain areas? It's so that they understand that, right? Where we talk about alpine plants that grow in mountains and things like that. And it's really important to think about that. So, and then when you're choosing those plants, obviously, that you want to grow in your garden, so you have to look at that, right, and see, well, what does naturally grow around there? What is a native plant? I am going to show you a document. It's called Respectful Harvesting Practices. It is from Comox School in BC, but they're pretty much the same across the board, I would say. So this one is talking about respectful harvesting protocols. Our elders remind us that we're related to everything around us, the earth, the plants, the animals. We came last. That's really important to understand, right? Our existence is dependent on our relatives, and we must always remember to give respectful thanks when we harvest. And if you don't understand that part, we call all of the animals on the planet our brothers and sisters, and the plants are also our cousins and brothers and sisters. So we treat them as they are equals, and as a matter of fact, they're like the beginning parts are almost more important than us, because they can exist without us. We cannot exist without them. So that's an important thing to remember too, right? So prior to going out to harvest something, we need to have the knowledge of how to harvest without harming. And this is really important. So we always talk about that environmental stewardship piece. So when I go out to harvest sage, for instance, not only do I offer tobacco in place of that plant, but I make sure that I don't take more than I should. I'm very careful that I take the male plants and do not take too many of the female plants in particular that have the seeds, unless I'm wanting some for seeds myself, which I have done and put in my garden. So it's really important to know that. And then we go around to different spots so that we're not depleting that area. It's also a practice. We never take more than we need. So that's also really important. So we have to always look at too, when we're cutting things down, when we're harvesting, if it's the right time. you know, it's, so there's just all these things that need to be done. And then if you look at the bottom of like this piece where it says here, so some nations have gathering songs traditionally sung by women when they harvest. Some use drum songs as well. And some have, you know, it's important for them because they honor they call them the plant people. Some Indigenous groups do. So plant harvesting tips, and this comes from Feasting for Change, and there's a website that goes along with it. You know, there are knowledge keepers who practice and learn from their elders about how to do this. I know that Jason Big Charles, that I've worked with on a few different things, he has a video online through ARPDC about harvesting plant medicines as well, how to do that. And he actually physically shows you, because he does a prayer at the beginning, offers tobacco, and he shows you about how to harvest them properly too. So that's always a good thing to know, because he's right here in Alberta. He's on the Métis Elizabeth settlement, but he also lives more of a traditional Cree life. Obviously, there are traditional offerings, and like I said, a prayer and thanks before harvesting. You try to harvest in the morning. It doesn't always work, right? So you try. You're always trying to be gentle and tread softly. And I know even when we were harvesting trees for teepees, so out in Bragg Creek, friend went out there and felled the trees, and then because we were doing this for Truth and Reconciliation Day, and taking the trees back to my friend's house, and then we were all taking them and paring, you know, peeling them so that we could get them ready for teepee poles. But we were super careful because to try to not step on the new growth, especially because the new pine trees that were coming up, I remember almost stepping on one and being like, you know, I almost did this, because now I'm killing another tree that's going to take how many years to grow. You have to be really careful of that. And also, right, only take what you need and leave some for the animals as well. And we share with others. So if somebody else needs something, like if they needed sage or they needed sweetgrass from me or cedar, I would share that with them. They would offer me tobacco as well, or trade me with something else. We always talk about don't pollute. Anyway, so there's a number of different things on here that you can look at, and kind of gives you some protocols. But like I say, you could also look at Jason's video online as well. It's a really good one. So it's also important to know for Indigenous peoples, there are sacred, there are medicinal and edible plants, and those that have special symbolism. So, and they can be all of those things too, not just one. They could be all of those things if you're looking at that. But those are kind of the areas. So we'll look first at sacred plants. So we have the 4 sacred medicines. And so we start with tobacco, because tobacco is the first medicine given by Creator. And so in that, if you'll notice, it's yellow there, that's kind of symbolizes the east. Not everybody prays in these directions, but I pray every morning 4 directions, and I start in the east, and that would be the color that I use. And then sweetgrass is in the south, and sage is in the west, and cedar is in the north. And you'll also notice the color there for sage, the container that it's in is black. That's probably the medicine wheel you're used to. I use blue. Most Cree use blue, and I follow Cree teachings. So it really depends where you go, though. But the colors can be also changed. They can be moved around, because I also know one of my elders from my Cree class, she's Machef, and she actually says red is supposed to be in the east. So no matter, it's different for everybody. But those are the 4 sacred medicines. So tobacco was given first by Creator, and you probably know as well that tobacco doesn't grow here. So tobacco had to be traded. So as well as cedar. Cedar did not grow here originally. We have plants now that botanists have, come up with that will survive here, but it isn't natural here as well. So both of those were traded across trading lines into southern US, into parts of Ontario, into BC. So just so you know how important they were. And then sweetgrass is the hair of Mother Earth. That's why it's braided like that into 7 pieces, and then braided to, you have 7 strands, and you braid those together into 3 pieces. And it talks about what parts of the, I don't have time to get into that, into braiding teachings that I've learned, but there's that. And then sage is also considered a woman's medicine. So sage can be used for many purposes. It can be used as a tea for healing, as well as cedar. And cedar and sage as well, both can be teas, or they can be baths as well. And they're all cleansing materials. And sweetgrass is also for peace, for calm. So growing Indigenous or native plants. So this is one of the sites I want to show you. There's the Alberta Native Plant Council. So they're obviously they're not Indigenous, but they do have lots of information on here about native plants to Alberta. And also they've got guidelines for native plant rescue, because there are a number that are obviously, disappearing because of people either over harvesting or pollution, or land taking over those spaces. So it's just a really good place to look for that. And they have also guidelines too and publications about those plants. I know I can spend too much time on all that stuff. I just want to be able to show you that those are there. And then this is a reclamation Alberta government, actually. It's a document about reclamation, about, like I was talking about, some of these plants are disappearing. So this is places where they have done reclamation and they have reestablished some of these natural plants that have been disappearing due to a good deal of, like I said, between pollution and then just land usage and taking over, and then not looking at what are these plants, just knocking them over and not worrying about it. So if you're interested in looking at that and just some of the things that they have done, like they talk about the disturbance types, right? So they've got mines, sand and gravel pits, transportation and utility quarters, forestry cut blocks, peat extraction sites, large construction projects, pipelines, well sites, and batteries in agricultural land. So all of these have gone into the destruction of a lot of the plants that are native to Alberta, right? So this is a project that works on restoring some of those things. And the Alberta Bee Council, of course, is so interested in this, and I think it's really important for children to understand this as well. That if we continue to destroy these things as well, we lose more bee populations. So if we lose the bee populations, we no longer exist. And that just shows that interrelatedness that Indigenous people have been talking about all along, right? That circle of life, and looking at the medicine wheel and how we're all interrelated. And again, I don't think children need to have this scariness thrown at them, obviously, in too great detail, but without these plants, without these animals, without the bees, we no longer exist because we rely on all of these things. So they do have a link to the wildflowers for Alberta's wild bees. So they have lots of them. And if you're able to get for your school, they probably wouldn't let you put bee containers up, but maybe if you've got a large schoolyard, you could put them up far away. I've got one I actually won one for the Métis Association. They sent me one that I have to put up next year. I didn't get a chance to do it this year because I'm redoing my garage where I want to put it. But yeah, anyways, there's a little bit of extra help here too to show you some things. So this one is a really good one. This is it's a Government of Alberta one, but it's a guide to growing school gardens in Alberta. Now, of course, we're talking about Indigenous plants. We want to look at that, but but I think it's got some really good information in here for kids, and it's got some ideas for meals and things like that as well, and showing kids, how we can do that. And I don't think there's anything wrong with doing that. If you want to grow Indigenous plants, for sure, right? Grow that, but you could have a section for a vegetable garden as well for some of your plants. We'll talk a little bit later too about, I know over the summer, like, what do I do with these things if I start it during the year, and in the spring it's going to grow throughout the summer. That's the next thing we're going to look at. So what are some maintenance kind of tips that you could use if you're going to have a school garden, and talking about summer maintenance? So what do you do with it over the summer? Obviously, it's really important to get some volunteers, or if there's a teacher that does live close to the school and they don't mind going over once in a while and doing that. I know in the cities it tends to be that we don't necessarily live close to the schools that we work at. If you're in a smaller community, that may be very much the case, and you probably could find it easier in a smaller community to get parents to volunteer as well, because everybody knows each other. But just talking about that, people that wouldn't mind volunteering to do that. And then they got some ideas here, right, to have a spreadsheet for a sign up, partner with a local organization as well that does programming over the summer. Sometimes there's city programs that might be around that maybe they would help with it so that they could keep it going, and also if they get to use it too, right? If you've got a volunteer gardener coordinate, sometimes, there's community gardens. I know I lived in Inglewood in Calgary for 5 years, and there's a community garden there, and there's quite a few in different places. Yeah, so just some different ideas for you. Some ideas about how to partner with other groups too. Talking about accessibility, because I know some schools, the way that they're set up, it might be hard to get to the garden. I know I was talking to one teacher, and they were saying, well, ours is actually in kind of this atrium that's out back and it's locked up all summer, so nobody could get to it. So I was like, well, yeah, that's definitely a quandary. Like maybe get somebody stand on the roof and pour the water over, kind of as a joke. It was like might be dangerous. Talking about garden layout and watering and that sort of thing too, which we're going to look at. If you guys want to add anything as we're going along, for sure, just let me know. But I'm going to show you some examples of school garden projects. Not all of these include Indigenous growing practices, but I just thought there were some good ideas for how you could set up a garden at least. Excuse me. This is Lauderdale School in Edmonton. I apologize, it's been a really long week. But we've got some photos of they call it a healing garden. And this one is honoring Indigenous people for their stewardship and connection to the land. We respectfully acknowledge the diverse culture and languages of the nations within the Treaty 6 territory whose land we call home. And then they go on to thank the Edmonton Native Plant Society and all those things, right? So that's, and then this is a picture of one of their garden spots. And I thought this is really cute. This is really neat. They invited a lady out, I guess, to work with them, and she's telling them some stories about, nature and plants and the Indigenous ways of knowing. And she's got a ribbon skirt on. And then the kids, I love this picture. They put up little flags around to represent the children. So it's their peace, what do they call it? Made peace prevail on earth. And so they did this for Orange Shirt Day in their peace garden. So it's really sweet. And this is another one that's a little bit of a close-up again of it. Right. So may peace be in our homes and communities. So just a really nice sentiment they've got there. Yeah, so it's one garden, and that's kind of cool because it's in Edmonton. Oh, somebody's in the chat. Carolyn asks, has there been custodial staff in the summer at any schools that may water the school garden? That's an interesting question. I honestly don't know. I think that would be something maybe to ask, because I also know that, I know particularly here in Calgary, the Calgary Board of Education, they go around all summer checking the schools. I don't know if there's anybody around doing custodial work every day, but that might be something to discuss with your, with your school division and find out what they do. It's an interesting question though. I've always figured that you'd have to just get somebody to go in and look after it. But again, it's too, how do you access the water and all that kind of stuff too? A lot of the time they're not going to leave that outside, or people would be using it all the time, right? This is Burt Church School in Airdrie, so it's just north of Calgary here. And I thought this was a really cool project, and I know they're finished it. This is an article when they were working on it, so it's just over a year ago that they were doing this. And they actually created, it is very specifically an Indigenous garden. So the teacher there is Jennifer Williams, and she's a social studies and Indigenous studies teacher there. And I think what she's saying in the article is that the kids, when they started to really understand what happened to Indigenous peoples at residential schools and all the things that the communities have gone through, that the kids were wanting to do something that would show they cared. And so they actually reached out to Indigenous knowledge keepers, and they wanted to make sure that it wasn't just done by them, that they had input. So they weren't just planting a bunch of flowers and things like that. They actually really, because she was doing Indigenous studies with them, really learned about medicinal plants and sacred plants and edible plants and Indigenous symbolism. So I think that's really important. So it's something that we're looking at right now. And they did get funding for it. They had a landscape architect to help with it, and they did that. So I'm going to show you guys as well how to get some funding for these projects too, if you want to start to do that. Oops, hold on. No, okay. There we go. So here's some lesson plans too to go along with it. I think once you get your garden going, you don't want to just plant it and be done with it, right? You want to have curriculum behind it, some ideas, right? And I thought here's some really good ones. For instance, this is saving garden seeds. So I think this is really important to know how to do, so that you're not always buying seeds, right? Showing kids that obviously you can grow new plants from the ones that you have there. And this is, what we do also as well for conservation. So you're not just getting rid of plants that we have and, destroying them, but taking the seeds from them to regrow and showing them how to do it. And they just have a bunch of different ones in there for mostly vegetables, but you can grow vegetables as well. There's some that are native to here as well. So this one is actually American, but hey, that's okay. It's American Heart Association. The school garden lesson plans. And I like this because it's geared more to the elementary as well. I think there's a lot of things you can find for a lot of the older kids as well. So this is getting anywhere from kindergarten up to about grade 5-ish in these lesson plans. And they cover a whole lot of different areas. So talking about a seed has a coat, right? The next one. And then they've got even pictures, they've got some graphics on here, which is nice. Talk about that. And then they look when you're growing seeds, so sprouting seeds, how can you, check on them? Because you could start, obviously, because our growing season is a lot later here in Alberta, you could start them inside too, right? Because if they're not perennial plants, you could definitely start those outside. But I mean, most of the native ones we're going to look at will be perennial because they would just naturally grow here anyway. But again, it depends on your zone, right? And how you're doing that. So if you're in a zone outside of where they naturally grow, you'd have to also explain that to the kids and bring that in and then talk about that. You could start them inside, maybe there's some grow lights and that sort of thing. And yeah, anyway, so there's some lesson plans in there. And then this is the community one, specifically looking at community gardens. So how are you going to set up your garden? So this is geared, like it says, to 6th to 8th grade, but you can do this for any group, right? So talking about how are you going to do this, how much time is it going to take to do this, to discuss it and to set it up. They've got some links to some garden how-to videos, how to plant your garden, that kind of stuff, how you can do it, building in a day, caring for it, fears in the garden, that kind of stuff. It gives you a list of materials you could use, some objectives, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, and then I know this is American, so you may not, like, the science standards may not match up, but you can definitely see where they fit in the new curriculum. I haven't matched up things to the new curriculum in that way. I've looked at First Nations stuff, but I haven't looked specifically against what it used to be. So anyways, yeah, so there's some things there for you to look at. And this is kidsgardening.org. And they have lots of things on here, like just a bunch of different ideas for you to look at. I love particularly the one that says object-based storytelling in the garden, because I think that really lends itself really well to Indigenous ways of knowing, right? That storytelling element. Because you could get a knowledge keeper if you could find one, or get a book of stories, things like that. Just that food exploration as well is one that you can look at too, that's over here, because food exploration, I think when you talk about Indigenous plants, right, we're really focusing on that. That gives you a way to focus on that and talk about where do these come from. And then bugs, right? We can talk about the interaction, the interconnectedness of everything. We can talk about that. We can look at the insects that are around and how do they help the plants as well too, right? Some of them, for instance, like ladybugs eat aphids, right? Mosquitoes do as well, as far as I know, and that helps to keep some of the pests around that would destroy the plants away. So some of those things like mosquitoes that maybe we don't like, they do serve a purpose, right? We can talk about that, as well as bats, right? You probably won't see bats during the day around your school, but at night I'm sure there's some around. And even talk to the kids about that. I think bats are cute, but other people don't. I think they're really cute. Mind you, and not when they're flying at your head. When I was a kid, they used to hang underneath the eaves of the outhouse at the cottage and fly at our heads if we took the light out at night. So that I did not like. But they're tiny in Manitoba. They're not really big. And then this I thought was just a really good kind of pedagogical article for you guys, just learning about culture and sustainable harvesting of native plants. Really talking about the teachings you can give to the kids to foster that appreciation of Indigenous knowledge. And they've got lots of pictures. And of course, this is, like I said, it's US, but we can always, as teachers, we're really good at adapting to what we're doing, right? talking about that eco-regional approach to school gardens. It's right there, right? And they've got some lesson plans in here, but you can take this and apply it, right? Like for instance, if you grew sage, right, you can talk about sage, and you don't have to make salve with sage, but you could talk about baths, you could talk about teas, you could talk about all those things and make them and talk about what they're used for. It's also for, you could explain this to the older children, especially something like sage. It's also called a women's plant because it's something that we can use even if we always say moon time. So if you're on your moon time, you can still use sage to smudge with, but not any of the other plants that are sacred. So you can touch that because it is a women's medicine as well. So it's an interesting one. Here's some garden project grants. So I want to show you guys these. So this one is Inside Education. And this talks about Nutrients for Life and Little Green Thumbs, which I also have a separate link for you as well. But Nutrients for Life, it's grades 7 to 12. And like I said, a lot of these applications close soon-ish. So this one is February 15th, 2024. So you can go there and look at that one. So that's one that's available. And this is Growing Native Plants. It's part of that Alberta Native Plant Council. And so, yeah, they also have someone here, so different ones that you can apply for. They've got the Pollinator Garden Challenge. And so that's for small scale native plants projects up to $1,000. You can apply for all of them. This is the Little Green Thumbs that was referenced on the other, but it's all here. Now, the only problem that I know of is a teacher that did attend before said that because the systems that they send out are actually older hydroponic systems, I guess because they have a whole bunch that they've used in the past, that it can be very draining on electricity. So that might be a detriment to it, but it's something you can look into. It's actually done where you start it, like it would be a hydroponic system, so you could start it inside the school. And the only reason I thought that was a possible thing you might want to do is because of our short growing season too, and give the kids a little more time to learn about them and then transfer the plants outside. Toronto Dominion Bank also has funding. And it's the Friends of the Environment Foundation grant that they have. And so it does include educational institutions, which is why I included that here. They have a list of things they don't fund, but the winter submission is January 15th, and then they meet in March and they let you know by April. So, and if you weren't going to do it this year, then you could look at the next application time is July 15th, and they let you know the next fall as to whether it's done. There's a Canadian Farm to School grant. It's available for K-12 schools in Canada up to $10,000. So there's that one as well, and that closes on, I guess I don't have the new dates up, but it's in February all the time. That one. And then A+ for energy grants through Inside Education as well. Here they showed the winners of those, and then you get an idea of who's received. And there's actually North Haven School here in Calgary, Notre Dame High School also in Calgary did it. Edmonton is Ross Shepherd High School. Oh, Rundle College actually did in Calgary as well, and then Spruce Avenue School in Edmonton. So quite a few actually have bought, and then I'm not sure where you are in Alberta, but they've got a whole list of them here as well too across Alberta. So there's those just to take a peek at. So maybe you can always contact those schools as well to find out what they've done if they're in your area or close to you. And then this is the Nutrients for Life Learning Gardens, and their deadline is February 15th. And then if they receive them after March 31st, then they're considered for the next spring application process, which would be, again, not obviously 2024 would be the one after. So you'd be looking at the next year. But they've got all the information online too, and they break it down for each province as well. So there's lots of stuff there. And then I've got some books to show you here. I do have copies of these myself, Medicines to Help Us, Traditional Métis Plant Use. I have that by Christy Belcourt, as well as Braiding Sweetgrass. And there is actually a version for kids of Braiding Sweetgrass. And I'm gonna actually, I just got another book. I just got this in I just got this one today. If you guys see if I can see if you see me. There you go. Might be a little bit hard to see. It might be backwards on the screen, but it's actually called A Cree Healer and His Medicine Bundle. And it's revelations of Indigenous wisdom, healing plants, practices, and stories. And so I've ordered this because I know a bunch of Métis educators that I was meeting with a few weeks ago had a copy of this and said it was really good. There's a few other books that I want to get as well. But yeah, it's got pictures in it of all the different plants and how they're used and traditionally, and really awesome stuff in here. So I'm excited about going through this book as well. So that's, I can, if you're interested, I can always put the name and all that information at the end of the presentation so that you can have the idea of that. Now this one, ethnobotany, was recommended, and it's an older, this is right, no, it's the next one, sure. But this one, this is Strong Nation. So this is an Indigenous bookstore online. And I always encourage people, if you can, I did order that other one off of Amazon, but I don't always do that, especially books like these ones, like Held by the Land, A Guide to Indigenous Plants for Wellness. I would definitely order this from them. This is the Braiding Sweetgrass for Young Adults. This is what I thought I'd show you guys, especially. So it's got the Indigenous wisdom, scientific knowledge, and teachings of plants. And that walking together, learning together. So there's a whole bunch of different books that give you some ideas of using Indigenous plants. Now this one I think is the one I was referring to. Yeah, in the presentation that I attended last year at this time through Telespark, they reference this book as well, which is the Native American medicinal plants. I guess it's like almost like the medical guide if you go to your doctor and they look up a medication and they've got that big book that they use. This is the same idea, not quite as big, but to use for Indigenous plants across North America. So that's kind of cool. And then here's some other resources as well for you. I'm not going to play this for you, but this is a really good session that I found on YouTube. And it's all about Indigenous plants. And so it's Environmental Student Action Challenge webinar. So I can't speak again, sorry, gardening with native plants. You know, it's been a long week one. But it's your Alberta Environment Protected Areas. So that's a really good one if you have time to watch that. And we've got the School Garden Network. And this is out of Ontario, but they still have some good ideas. Talking about school food gardens, if that's something that you wanted to do as well. And they do have information about class hydroponics. It goes along with that one website I showed you that does do hydroponics. And then this is also an Alberta document. Stepping Stones is about traditional plants. So planning your learning journey about using traditional plants and uses, and just gives you some ideas about the 4 main medicines, right? And they also talk about diamond willow fungus, which I also use for migraines and things like that. Burn a little bit of that as well. You kind of use it as like you would steam your face over hot water. You put yourself over the plant. And this is so this is a copy of an actual link to a book, and this is very similar to that other one, but it's specifically Canada, and I actually have a downloaded copy onto my computer, so it's a PDF of an old book that's out of print, but it's Traditional Plant Foods of Canadian Indigenous Peoples, so it's very detailed. It's got a lot of good information, so once you get the links for this, you can always download that as well. And then teacher resources from the University of Alberta, which is really good, talking about garden development, and they've got lesson plans on here. And these are more geared, and I wanted to include as well some stuff for high school, and there's some junior high as well. And there's some classroom resources as well for the older kids. And also, again, some more schoolyard projects and things that I didn't include, some things that I did, but they've got a lot more stuff in here as well. Just if you're looking at more of that high school stuff. And then the garden development. They do have some of the same things that I have, but a few more things as well. Including some stories. Like I said, it's always really good to include that. And just a whole other list of books and things that I didn't have on my list too. So yeah, there you go. And I think I made it through everything on time. There you go, I did. I try to leave about 10 minutes at the end, so I'm going to stop share now. Stop recording.